But I still will introduce him now, so you don't need to get to this introduction when he arrives. He's a co-founder and chair of board of NGO De Jure, and he's a legal education expert and judicial reform expert. He served as a member of Public Integrity Council since November 2016 and coordinator of Public Integrity Council since December 2018. He has a PhD in law and served as a judge on the Vinnytsia District Administrative Court from February 2012 to September 2015, and I hope he will arrive pretty soon. So the discussion we will have with this distinguished team is institutions as pillars for recovery, how to build social dialogue and trust. I would start from another perspective. Is it possible to have institutions without social dialogue and trust? Who could answer me this question? Maybe Arsen, you have you have experience in building several institutions also from scratch. How could you build them? Did you have trust when you were doing that?
I think we did, and answer your questions, I'd say that technically you can build an institution without having public trust. You can rely solely on the formal mandate that is given to you by the government, for example, or the parliament, or the president of Ukraine, and you can rely just on that. But this is a very short-sighted strategy that always proves wrong. Because the thing is that if you build an institution without public trust, you are totally dependent on the political cycle, so to say. You're totally dependent on the vision of politicians about how to deal with certain issues. Sometimes their vision is well-informed, based on sound judgment. Sometimes not. Usually they are not as well informed as those who manage institutions about the sphere that they are responsible for. So this is why it is always a good idea to rely not just on the mandate that you've been formally given, but also on the wider public, on the wider mandate that can be provided by the civil society, and media here plays a key role.
Thank you. That is an amazing start of this discussion. But as we are at a media forum in Lviv, we have one particular social institution which has a special meaning for us all, and that is the media. And when you founded media, when you run media, when you representing one of the most important media in Ukraine, what is the role of media in this war and what it will be after the war?
Thank you, Sergey. Thank you to the organizers for this great event. My English is not good enough for this so serious topic. I'll speak Ukrainian. Спершу коротка ремарка до відповіді.
First of all, I would like to briefly address the question whether the institutions can be built without public trust. So if we look at the efficient institutions developed throughout the recent 10 years, I would immediately come with the example of the National Bank of Ukraine. This institution has gone a radical overhaul in 2015, 2016, and the National Bank at that time and even now is one of the least favored public institutions among the public. So definitely the public doesn't like the National Bank, and the head of the National Bank of Ukraine is the big enemy of the Ukrainians. But at the same time, the reform of the National Bank of Ukraine was very successful, and the National Bank has already changed 4 heads and still is a very efficient institution. Coming back to your question about the media, I think all people will agree that the media as an institution is very important. Before talking about the role of the media, I would like to mention a couple of words about the media as an institute of Ukraine. I think you all agree that we have this institute in Ukraine, and the Lviv Media Forum is another example of it. It exists for more than 10 years, and it's just one more puzzle that proves it. But if we put the question like that, whether we have enough media as institutions, the answer won't be that straightforward. So when the discussion is raised, I ask people to do a mental experiment. Just imagine that Yanukovych would stop on the way to Europe a bit earlier. Think what was happening in 2012-2013 to media, how vulnerable the Ukrainian media were at that time. Everything was bought, people were bribed or intimidated, and I'm sure that probably we needed a couple of years, and the media would just be ousted, and the dignity revolution would have some more difficult circumstances. Can you name at least one media as a powerful institution, as an organization that helps control, that does oversight, that helps prevent mistakes, that has good supervisory board, that has very good clear-cut processes, and has stable resources, be it, for example, a sustainable business model or sustainable funding? I probably wouldn't come up with the answer very easy. So the media as an institution is really a challenge for Ukraine. Now I'd like to come back to your first question about the role of the media. War is a very difficult topic, but sometimes it simplifies the vision of the world. I'm not going to mention right now war-related journalism, because I mainly deal with business or economic journalism. But during the war, you have everything in black and white. You have such categories as Monaco Battalion or some other simplified versions of the world. But the post-war world will be more difficult for all of us, journalists including. And there will be lots of things which won't be seen in black and white. And here we shall need these media as institutions that elaborate new standards, new approaches, new language, that build this complicated discussion in order to get the answers to some difficult questions, and there will be lots of such questions. And where will this media come from as a powerful institution is another difficult question. I would probably say that here we have lots of representatives of small-scale media, which are good, but the institutions is the prerogative of big media. Nobody is going to establish an editorial board or a supervisory board if you have just 10 people in staff. It doesn't work like this in business. For example, if we are talking about small-scale companies, they are not big institutions. So encouragement, training should be in place. So if you think that you will find at least one media editor or a journalist who would like his or her media to become an institution, probably it won't be easy. For example, the owner would like to have its own authority, the journalists do not want to have any code to comply with.
просування
So
цієї
we have
ідеї
to
і
promote this
стимулювання
idea.
побудови.
We
Тут
have
є багато
to
донорів, і коли ви
make
кажете про
impetus for
інституційну
this
підтримку,
idea.
вона
And when you are talking
не
about
зовсім така
institutional
інституційна,
support, it
як
is
є в цьому
not
слові.
as institutional as
Це
it
трошки
should be,
про
as
інше.
the very word presupposes.
Thank you. You have exceeded expectations of my, which I had when I asked this question. But I think it is important what you said, that the institution may not has an owner. If a company or some organization has an owner, it can be a good company, but it is not an institution. An institution is something which is a pillar which serves the whole society, and therefore it has to be like autonomous to some sort. And we had like in media we had the Suspilne, which was an attempt to be created as an institution. It is still in process of construction. Maybe it will be one day. But we also had the same approaches to create institutions in other areas, and one of them is the area of fight against corruption. And we have like many agencies, many organizations which have been created exactly on this level because there was the demand in the city. And my question in the country. And my question goes to Irina Chekhovets. What do you think is the fight against corruption? Will it be one of the pillars of the ideas of the Ukrainian society after the war, as it used to be like in 2015 and later?
Дякую за запитання.
Коротка
відповідь так, а довга відповідь в мене в презентації.
But I have a longer answer in my presentation.
Насправді відбудова і антикорупційна боротьба повинна початись не після війни,
Combating corruption should be something that won't start after the war, but should already be in place. Thank you very much for mentioning training as an impetus, which will enable us to do this. I would like to show the results of the poll organized and conducted in 2022, and according to which corruption is in top 3. In top 3 challenges as viewed by our people. At the end of my presentation, I'll answer why the perception is like that. But we, as the National Agency for Corruption Prevention, also have our own answers, and I would like to voice them. This slide shows that the higher level of perception of corruption in the government, the lower level of trust. This is a systemic story that influences the decrease in trust. So this is something that this panel is about. As we are talking about increasing trust, we should mention it at 3 levels. Combating corruption should take place at the level of the state, at the level of organizations, and at the level of the entire society. At the level of the state, we have 3 big components. The inevitable punishment, and this is actually the highest request on the part of the society. Another component is building the institution and anti-corruption systems in such a way that corruption becomes inconvenient. And the third point, and I do believe in it, is building integrity. And this is the educational or enlightenment element. There are some systemic solutions for these 3 components, and in March 2023, the State Anti-Corruption Program for 2023-2025 was passed, and this is actually the recipe book, the big and comprehensive program for all the organizations that includes the list of measures that we as the state should employ to build integrity-based society. We are not waiting for the end of the war, we are not waiting for our victory, because after our victory we have to already tackle the issue. Then there are state institutions which regulate the system from the top, and this issue has already been addressed today. So can the state exclusively build integrity-based society? So could we shift this responsibility exclusively on the state? We think that the answer will be no, because different institutions, different organizations should have their own system, anti-corruption system in place. And again, there should be three components here. Each organization is supposed to have anti-corruption infrastructure, the infrastructure of the so-called moral, and the HR infrastructure. And I'll give you some details about these components. Anti-corruption infrastructure in each organization. This is something anti-corruption compliance is developed. Special regulatory provisions. This is the so-called red flag, which you cannot cross. This is a guidance how you should work in compliance with the legislation. This is the brick you should go to, and the big pillar is the infrastructure of moral values. We are talking about the selection of managers with decent salaries. These are certain ethical dilemmas that are addressed by the organizations. And we understand that without human resources, without human capital, this story probably will not be complete. You have spent half of your time. I do hope that this is half of what you wanted to say. I also want to say what should be done at the level of society. And we can be talking about internalization of the state. Now the position when policy is a big point and I'm just a small person, and we should get rid of all the politicians. So this position is not, this stance is not efficient anymore. Every citizen should show interest in policy, in the history of our country. And now we have lots of people who experienced life in some other countries, and citizenship should be something we should take as one of our pillars. Good politicians should not be afraid of it. The state doesn't have any other hands but ours, and therefore big part of responsibility for rebuilding the state, for anti-corruption, is with the society, is with the way we control our state and build our state. In conclusion, I would like to say that everything should take place at the level of the state, at the level of organizations, and at the level of society. And now I would like to come back to media and coverage of corruption in media. 64% perception of corruption is the greatest problem. In this slide, looks slightly different. There was another survey, and the question was whether you have personally had a case of corruption, whether you have heard it from your friends or relatives or you heard it from media, only 16% people mention it as their own personal experience. That means that only 16% of people really had their personal experience of corruption. And this is the question to media. Again, there was another survey, and that survey showed that the biggest emphasis of media coverage is related to high-profile corruption cases, scandals and hate. Well, our society generally tends to these hate tendencies, and media, as part of the society, actually meets this. And very small percentage is about good practices and good examples. And consequently, it unfortunately distorts the perception of citizens. Unfortunately, we do not have the statistics of how much is the publications of the Russian media and how much of this is Ukrainian media, but it's a good foundation for us to think what should we do next and how we should shift this emphasis onto building the country, building the state up to a certain standards. I would like to respond a bit. When I heard the beginning of your presentation, I wanted to ask a question. Why 64% mentioned that it is one of top three? I'm talking about corruption, and when you ask about the personal experience, it's already not even in top 3 or even in top 10. At the end of your presentation, you have answered my question, but my question is more practical. What do you mean, actually? Should we not cover your activity? Should we show it from a different angle? So here we have media people. Try to answer the question. Thank you for the question. Being aware of this issue, our agency is trying to develop a general communication strategy which will be aimed at covering the state anti-corruption program and the achievements. We do hope this will be achievements that we are going to have in Ukraine, and we do hope that the presentation of this anti-corruption communication strategy will take place in the nearest future, and there will be all the answers to your questions.
Thank you so much. It is indeed like a very moving presentation. Thank you. And regarding the perception of corruption, I can remember my talk with one European politician who told me like 3-4 years ago that if this politician would have had the same rules for transparency and presenting online all the property, including like private devices like watches, phones, like rare books, etc., online, this person said that they would have left the political sphere because it would have been unbearable for them to remain an active politician when all the people knows exactly how much he has and what kind of property they have. So that is also the question, like, is Ukraine as corrupt as we believe? We know the cases of corruption, but is the corruption so omnipresent as it was used to be said? And my next question goes to Mikhail Zhernakov. Welcome him. As promised, he arrived. And but you worked in an institution which is maybe being seen in Ukraine as the most problematic and which is like not loved at all. You work as a judge. And now, like, you are as a judicial reform and legal education expert, you work also in your NGO, the Euro, and you work with the reforms. Can Ukraine be rebuilt and can we have recovery when the trust to the most crucial institution, to justice itself, is damaged?
Дякую. Доброго дня.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm sorry I'm late, but fortunately I made it. I would like to start with two statements. I don't think that I need to convince anyone, but we need to remind everyone anyway that without the rule of law, we will not have anything. We will not have strong economy, we will not have human rights, we will not have Euro integration, robust state, army, and whatnot. There will be NATO membership. My second point is that it's not that easy to do all these things, as we can see. When we are talking about institution building, and I think we all understand that without sustainable institutions, reforms, transformation, modernization, whatever you name it, are not possible. So basically, if we do not have institutions, we cannot really continue replacing these institutions with the so-called crutches. Not everything is what you call it, like the new Supreme Court. I mean, whenever we build something and you name it something, it doesn't really mean that it will do what you want it to do. We made a lot of blunders in the past in this regard, and we need to take our lessons and we need to do everything possible to prevent these mistakes from recurring. I hate the words "we told you." It just means that you didn't do a good enough job. You should have done something better. You should have said it in a more clear or persuasive way. But in 2017, we made it clear that it was not a new Supreme Court. We had people there with watches worth 50,000 USD. Then it turned out that there was Bogdan Lvov, a deputy head of the Supreme Court, a Russian citizen. I mean, it turned out that he was a Russian citizen. We also had people with tax IDs of the Russian Federation. They become judges of the Supreme Court, and the Integrity Commission stated that they didn't really have any doubts about their integrity. Or we had some judges with relatives that had dozens of vehicles. So we articulated all these arguments and put them on the table in the Public Integrity Council. And there was no proper response. Back then, we all wanted this new Supreme Court. We wanted to have a professional community. We wanted to have representatives of the public sector. There was also a high demand from the international partners, but everyone turned a blind eye, unfortunately. They started saying, do not blow it up, do not exaggerate. By and large, it's functioning pretty well. Several years have passed, and now we are surprised about 3 million USD in bribes for the head of the Supreme Court. So you have this disclosure of the story about 3 million USD, and then we select another judge that let go the murderers of some activists. So this is a person that lied in the declarations and so on. 148 out of 148 voices. So basically, the new Supreme Court selected this new head of the Supreme Court after this high-profile story and scandal. So what are some of the lessons that we can take? We should not turn a blind eye to the problem. We should listen to the public organizations and specialized NGOs when they disclose problems. We need to take action. And another lesson is related to no wishful thinking. Reforms do not happen overnight. We cannot build institutions overnight. It's obvious that we cannot really achieve change within a short time frame, and it's not a tragedy. But if something goes awry, we need to do everything within our capacity to rectify it as soon as possible and not think later how come that it happened. We've been talking extensively about trust in the judiciary, but the most important element here is the performance. Even before the full-scale invasion, we would often say that the Ukrainians did not have trust in the public institutions. Even before the full-scale invasion, the Ukrainians had trust in the armed forces of Ukraine. Why? Because Ukraine's armed forces are clearly demonstrating that they are ready to sacrifice their lives for us. So this is their performance. If you have high performance, that there are no issues with trust.
If institutions are high-performing, then the trust will be there. I would like to also emphasize the role of international organizations and donors. Unfortunately, we have the same disease as with the Supreme Court of Ukraine. They made significant investments in this process. They aspired to see success and positive fruits, and they also turned a blind eye to a lot of the things that we tried to communicate to them. And unfortunately, they also contributed to the marginalization of some public councils and NGOs like the Public Integrity Council, and unfortunately, this is something that impinged on some of the reforms, including the judicial reform. Roman Vashchuk, the former ambassador in Canada, recognized his mistake, that he was mistaken about the Supreme Court in the short and midterm, and hopefully we will draw our lessons from this. What can we do about it? It's a good question. I believe that we need to take off rosy spectacles. It's particularly true of international organizations, because we are having the exact same discussions like back in 2017 around the Supreme Court. It's like a déjà vu. We basically have the same debates about the Constitutional Court and its reform. And by the way, it's the #1 reform out of the 7 that we need for our European integration. But we have the exact same issues in the center of this discussion. Following the Revolution of Dignity, we were told, come on, Ukraine has transformed. The corruption is embodied by Yanukovych. Yanukovych fled the country, so we don't have any corruption whatsoever in Ukraine anymore. Fortunately, partially it's true, but unfortunately, not 100%, and we still can see corruption creeping into the Supreme Court and some other institutions that we try to reboot. Now in 2022, 2023, we point our finger to Russia when we're talking about corruption, so corruption is about Russia. We don't have corruption in Ukraine. This is the thinking of our international partners. So why do we need these additional international experts in the judges selection committees? Of course, I'm simplifying all these messages and discussions, but we can still see these rosy spectacles worn by some of the international colleagues with regard to Ukraine. And this is something that is not assistant in us accelerating on the pathway of reforms, because we could move much faster, to be honest. I'm almost done. Unfortunately, we still have 2 Ukraines. We have one Ukraine where you have this 23-year-old National Guard officer at a checkpoint protecting Ukraine, and the other Ukraine is this wasted judge that killed him the other night. And this other Ukraine is still real, unfortunately, and this is the message that we need to take in, that our international partners need to take in. And it's not about talks, it's not about discussions. We have the National Anti-Corruption Bureau, we have the Specialized Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office. It's not just about prevention. We have some people in our society that need to be punished, otherwise they will not really get the message, it will not really hit home. And some vivid numbers. The commission that was responsible for the selection of the judges and an integrity analysis, 6 international experts, 0 Ukrainians, and they made decisions on the integrity of the judges of the Supreme Court. We can see the result. And as for, that was about the Constitutional Court, and we also had a commission that selected the judges for the Supreme Court. We will veer back to that issue. It's an important one. Please wrap up. Commission that selected the judges of the Supreme Court, 16 representatives from Ukraine and 0 international experts. I'm talking about the people who selected the judges of the Supreme Court. Some of them catch the head of the Supreme Court taking a $3 million USD bribe, and others are taking this bribe. But as for who is going to do that, this is something that I will expound on a little bit later. Thank you very much. To the best of my understanding, most of the panelists feel better speaking Ukrainian, so it doesn't really make sense for me to moderate this discussion in English, so we have this ugly Ukrainization in action right now. So I will continue in Ukrainian. My next question is to Mr. Bogdan Kelychaviy.
Ви як представник міської влади і громади, і насправді
an urban community, you represent the local authorities. We had the decentralization reform implemented in Ukraine, and by dint of this reform, we implemented one of the pillars of strong and robust Ukraine, the building of powerful communities, and now we can see that Territorial Defense Force is one of the most powerful defense mechanisms and elements in the defense system of Ukraine. In your opinion, what is the ground for this trust in your community?
Дякую за запитання.
Thank you for the question.
Я думаю, що це, мабуть, така
I think
часткове очікування того, що
that partially it's
маленькі
this
громади
expectation
буде розмовляти обов'язково українською, але я б
that
хотів навпаки настояти на тому,
since
що
I
я хотів
represent a
би
small
свою
community, I
англійською
will
мовою,
speak
тому що
Ukrainian, but I would
якщо ми
like to
говоримо
speak
про
English.
європейську інтеграцію чи інтеграцію
We are
зі
talking
світом,
about European
ми
integration
обов'язково
and
маємо
global
вчитись.
integration, and
Виходить
that
нам це чи не
means
виходить,
that we need to master the
я
English
думаю, що це
language.
дуже важливий,
Whether we
мабуть,
succeed
крок
or
для нас,
fail,
тим більше,
it's a
якщо
different
ви
question, but we
починали
need to
модерувати
at least give it a try. I mean, you started
It's up to
moderating
you.
in English, so I prefer speaking English.
So thanks a lot for the question. It's a great honor to be here. Regarding the local municipalities, yes, we went through the reform of the decentralization recently, and a lot of things changed. And I will start from the positive aspects about what changed from the institutional level. We have different municipalities all over Ukraine. Every one of you is living in one or another municipality, bigger or smaller, but everybody is living in a hromada right now, right? And different regions of Ukraine, they had different challenges, and they had different reactions on the full-scale invasion from Russia. And being a member of the Association of Municipalities of Ukraine, I have a lot of examples from my colleagues from different mayors who got kidnapped, who got killed, who got like so many things they went through. Some of them had to flee and rescue some of their citizens. And one of the question is from Luhansk region. I have a colleague from that from one of the municipalities in the Luhansk region, and it was like a bit comic situation because when the Russians came and they started thinking how to establish a new order, they just couldn't figure out how the municipality operates in Ukraine right now, going through the reform of decentralization. Because after the collapse of Soviet Union, local governance, if we can call it so, right, centrally regulated local governance, was quite similar in Ukraine and Russia. And now the harsh reality came because it was so different, because Russians, by wanting to establish a new order, they didn't know who is starosta, who is this guy who is just managing this village and has no budget, or where all the money are at the district level. The district level doesn't have a lot of money, and they don't have a lot of responsibilities. They're not responsible for schools and healthcare centers. So there's so many surprises for our aggressors. And this is one of the institutional things that we managed to build. Maybe this could be like part of our resiliency, because it took some time for them to figure out how it works. And if they wanted to turn back the system, also takes them some time for that. And this is how we can see our progress, our own progress of building new institutions. When we have strong municipalities, when we have amalgamated municipalities with own budget, with more responsibilities, with more cooperations with others, right? This is a kind of like the positive story in terms of how we build our institutions in the local level. But from another hand, and I think it's mostly touching a lot of Ukrainian institutions, a lot of Ukrainian fields, is that, in my opinion, institutions is something that is totally different from personalized approach. And speaking about the local governance, we still have a lot of expectations from people, from local residents, from voters, that we need a mayor who is a person who is putting a lot of hopes on him or her, but they don't expect the institutions to work with. Like a lot of people, they expect the mayor has to solve all the smallest issues that the people have. And with that, we have situations when the mayor, sometimes they have a lot of responsibilities, sometimes they have a lot of results, and then they suddenly lose elections. And their municipality is at risk that somebody, some new person comes and doesn't know anything about how to govern this territory, this municipality, because we have direct elections, and then everybody expects the mayor to be the leader and be the manager of the city. But sometimes people have different backgrounds. Like you can vote for the mayor who is a guitar player, who's famous Instagram blogger, who is just going to church or anything like that. But the deciding factor is not the professionalism in local governance. And having a lot of partners from international community, from different countries, we see this institution of city managers, something that we're lacking of. We don't have that. And what it means, let's say this is US, this is in Belgium, we have a Belgium sister city, we have it in Sweden, that you can have a mayor, but you can also have a CEO who is not political, and this ensures the continuity of professional government of every municipality. Because now we have a lot of good stories, a lot of success cases, we have a lot of pilots in different municipalities, we have a lot of examples of brilliant resiliency of Russian aggression, but also, besides that, we have a lot of cases of total a lot of mayors are so lost in this situation. They don't know what to do. Like when we have international donors coming in, they don't know how to react on that. They don't know how to be good partners with them. And for that, I guess, maybe this is some institution that we have to consider of having city managers in Ukraine. Because in Ukraine, the mayor and the city manager is one person. And the mayor is responsible from strategic things, from political issues, to the smallest details possible running in the city. That's it for me for this question.
That is amazing what you're describing. That is exactly about the social dialogue and trust. Because if you elect a person and the person fails, then you lose to a certain extent your trust into the system. Because hey, I voted for him or her, and then it was a flop. But what you described, creating a system where you have a sustainable governance of the town, that is exactly about containing trust, preserving trust, and having dialogue. But when you work as a city manager, as a head of the community, can you see that there is now more trust into institution of self-governance because people see where taxes have been paid, etc.?
I think it depends on the situation. Trust is a very broad concept, and of course, when the Russian invasion started, full-scale invasion started, there was no such thing as opposition anymore in my town. Everybody who was against something that we were doing, they were so scared that everybody got united together. Then when we are located in the western part of Ukraine, so it's much more safe comparing to previously mentioned Luhansk region, people start relaxing a little bit more, and then we start having political discussion, and then as in any democratic process, you have trust for some popular things that you're doing, and also distrust for some reforms that you're doing. For instance, we have, let's say, if you build a sidewalk, people would be like, oh yeah, I trust this government because we like these tangible results. But at the same time, our state now is stimulating us to reform the healthcare system, so meaning that a lot of hospitals will be shut down soon. Also, we're shutting down a lot of schools, reducing budget for financing school from the central level government, and this is done by the hands of the local government. So when you're explaining that when you're explaining the topic of the efficiency of education, and this may potentially take to closing schools in the smallest villages and taking kids to bigger schools to give them access to better education, sometimes you don't have that trust, obviously, right? Because a lot of people would be just surprised what's going on, and some people may lose their jobs because of that reforms. So it all depends, and I guess on the local governance level, it's important to be balancing, because if you're only trying to be popular, then you cannot do so many reforms, you cannot do some real things. On the other hand, if you want to do only reforms, you may not be a mayor next time. That's why it's kind of like a shaky situation, but I guess that generally the tendency is moving towards increasing trust, because through the decentralization reform, we got this principle of subsidiarity when more decisions are made locally, and also when people can see who is governing them, when they can have some small talks on the street, it makes them feel more comfortable, and they know that like if there is any situation they want to discuss, they can come to the city hall and discuss that with the mayor or with the deputy mayors. So we are closer to our citizens now. It's not somewhere far away in a district level, somewhere in another city where nobody knows anybody and nobody elects anybody. I think that this democratic process and the process that we have more responsibilities and more budget and we are closer to the citizens, generally this is a good tendency, and I guess that the decentralization reform, if I had like a short answer, is a really, really great reform.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask Arsen the next question, but I see that you wanted to comment, so please go on with comment, and then we'll have a quick Q&A session.
То якою мовою ми говоримо, давайте визначимося.
Ну от я вже не знаю. Я тут гость, тобто якою мовою ви до мене звертаєтесь, я залюбки відповідаю.
Я вже нотатки записав українською, тому буду українською. Хоча можу і кримсько-татарською, але це не допоможе.
Speaking Ukrainian then, I can also do it in Crimean Tatar language, but I don't think people will understand me. I think we should focus a bit more on the very topic. We are talking about the institutions participating in the rebuilding process and how media should participate in creating trust, building up trust to these institutions. I'm not going to discuss the issue of social institutions. Well, on the one hand, we have the institutions. What do we have on the other hand? What I can offer on the other hand is the very case, because the institutions are not the organizations with a special organizational form. There are certain rules of the game which are stable and do not depend on certain personas. On the other hand, we have personalities or personas that have some visionary stance. They feel something, they do something, but this is not a constant story, it depends on the personality, and we cannot state that there is a definite answer what will happen in the conditional future, because we don't know what a person will decide who is responsible for setting the rules of the game. So what is the role of the institutions? They have to make sure that those people responsible for the development of the institutions are developing the very institutions and not themselves within these institutions. We have to make sure that by creating certain practices, they are enhanced with the rules and provisions of the institutions, and when the moment comes that these persons are not there anymore, still what has been built and what has been done will stay and will be deep-rooted. And what is the role of media? And I'll come to corruption a bit later. So what's the role of the media? The media has to understand what is their motivation. Are they motivated by clickbaits and popularity? This is just one story. Or they are motivated to become gatekeepers.
запобіжником від
to become
відкату
the
назад,
prevention mechanism,
який професійно
preventing
висвітлює
redress.
діяльність інституцій.
Or they will be
Саме
the media will
вирівнюванні
professionally highlight
інформаційного
and cover the
дисбалансу
activity
між,
of
з
the
одного боку,
institutions.
інституцією
We
та з
have
іншого боку,
somehow
суспільством, і полягає, як на мене,
equal
роль
this
громадських
misbalance
організацій
between the
медіа.
media
Бо якщо
and the
зараз я почну говорити про
institutions.
закупівлі,
If
ніхто не зрозуміє, про що
if
я
I'll
говорю.
start talking
Але
about
ті
procurement
журналісти, ті
now, you
громадські
probably
організації,
won't
які професійно
understand
цим
what I'm talking
займаються,
about. But
вони
those
зрозуміють,
media and public
розтлумачать для
organizations
людей,
who deal with it on the
і лише
professional
на
level
основі
will
розуміння
understand it, will
має
interpret it for
вибудовуватись
people.
довіра.
And it
Бо
is
якщо
only on
довіра
the basis of
вибудовується на основі
understanding that the
харизми,
trust
то ми маємо
will be
Сеніченка,
built
ми
on.
маємо
Because
Князєва,
if it is
ми
built
маємо
exclusively on
Тандир,
charisma,
чи
we have
Тандер,
Mr. Knyazyev,
але Тандир
we
цікавіше,
have
як на мене.
Tander,
Тому тут питання,
And many other
власне,
issues.
до медіа. Яку
So
роль
the question
медіа бачать?
is
Чи це
to
про
the very
клікбейт та
media.
популярність?
So
Чи це
how
про
do they
гейткіпінг?
see themselves?
Бо
Is
якщо
it
про
about
клікбейт та популярність, то
clickbaits
завершую.
and
Дійсно,
popularity, or
завжди
is
буде
it
корупція
gatekeeping? If it's only
на
about clickbaits,
всіх
there will
перших
always be
шпальтах.
corruption,
Вона
and
того
corruption
заслуговує,
will
коли
be
дійсно
highlighted.
воно відбувається, але річ у тім, що є
And
зворотній
definitely
ефект,
it should be
коли
like
нічого
this.
іншого не відбувається, і
But
що інше не пишуть.
There is also
Відбувається
a reversal
нормалізація
effect
для
when
можновладців
it is the only
цього
thing
явища.
that is
І коли
highlighted.
вони заходять на
And
посади,
this event
вони
is
думають, ну слухайте, в мене
normalized
є враження,
for
що
the
всі цим
politicians
займаються,
and for
а
the
я що?
officials. And that
Я хіба
means that
крайній?
when a person
Теж маю
comes,
право. Я твердо
occupies
вважаю,
a
і
certain
право
position,
маю. Да?
this person
Тут
thinks
є, власне,
that
питання до медіа. Я сподіваюся, що ми
everybody
більше говоримо
is
про
doing it, so
гейткіпінг, а
why
не
he or she is
клікбейтінг.
not doing it.
Thank you for your
So once
attention.
again, my issue was
Teşekkür
gatekeeping.
Arsen Efendi. Дякую вам дуже за
Thank
те,
you very
що
much,
ви розповіли. Я
Arsen,
думаю, що це
for
дуже важливий
you have
момент, що
That's
наскільки
an
довгострокова ця
important
довіра і
issue,
наскільки серйозне
how
розчарування
long-term
після того, як
this
ця
trust
довіра, а
is
інколи
and
це не
how
через
deep the
якусь там
disappointment
брехню або свідому ілюзію, що було зроблено, а саме через занадто високі очікування від того, що зараз все прийде до
disappointment,
свого
what has been done or what not has been done, but because of certain illusions that soon we are going to have an ideal picture and it doesn't happen, and as a result we have this global and strategic distrust to the institution. Now it's time to ask questions. Okay, we have two people, we have three people. I think there may be many questions, and that's cool because it's a huge discussion and we can just spend a bit more time for these issues. Good afternoon, Yulia Bankova, Chief Editor, Liga.net. It probably won't be a question, but more of a reflection. I would like to respond to the role of media in covering the activity of anti-corruption authorities. Seems to me the state institutions have a distorted view of the media's role in this area. The typical activity of the anti-corruption authorities is not a victory, it's a norm. The role of media is to cover the social important issues, certain challenges, but not just describe everyday cases, everyday activities of the State Investigation Bureau. For example, I get lots of information from the Bureau of Economic Security about the activity, and if we write about it every day, I don't know how I would explain to my readers why the head of this institution was dismissed from his position. So I think we should have bigger understanding of the role of media. The anti-corruption authorities have slightly different KPIs than mentions of their activities in the media. Thank you. Are there any comments? We can provide the comment to the last statement. Well, the practice shows that not, because when the previous head of this organization had to the investigation, to the interview with the investigation commission, he said, well, we have so many subscribers in the Instagram and we have so many posts in the Telegram, etc. Answering to the question of Arsen, the highest role of media is to provide services to the readers, viewers, and listeners to be beneficial and useful to them. And if we are talking about the conditional website providing general news, probably the task is to just give some alerting news to the readers every 10 minutes. But we think that our role is to give the business people, the entrepreneurs, a bit more useful information than mentioned, for example, in the news. Well, I don't know whether we are always successful, but at least we are trying to do it. Thank you. Irina, you wanted also to add. I also have a question. Don't you think that the norm is when everything is good and when the country is prospering? And in this case, the activity of the anti-corruption authorities is also a norm, and any other deviations is the ground for the information publication. But when now we live in the wartime, and don't you think that some positive developments in this area should be considered as victory? So this is probably a question to you. I think that this discussion probably may be continued during lunch. Mr. Andrei Kelychaviy, I think that we concentrate too much on the English language, and therefore we cannot cover the French language or German speaking audience, so I'll be speaking Ukrainian. A question to Arsen Zhumadilov. Talking about social dialogue, how much are you satisfied with the level of the dialogue which exists between the Tatar community and the Ukrainian society? And when we discuss the institutions, how do you evaluate the potential of Majlis, whether it will be the foundation for social institution development in the Crimea, and whether we can be talking about all Ukrainian influence? We shall try to address the first part of your question during the next panel, so I'll keep it for the next panel. The second part of this question, whether Majlis and Kurultai will continue their functioning in the deoccupied Crimea as institutions. This is a good question, and it's an open question. Whether they are the institutions that will function in continuum, irrespective of their heads, or whether we are talking about a very powerful and influential leader whom we respect a lot and who legitimized his vision for our nation, for our people. It's also an important question for me personally, and for me, it seems to me, it's more of the first part of my answer than the second. Thank you very much for the question, for the answer, and if this topic will be discussed during the next panel, I'll be an attentive listener, because in my opinion, it is one of the most important questions. How Ukraine is going to build its stable and sustainable construction, this social agreement, in order to just enhance the control over the Crimea, which was the key for that region, which was actually annexed by Russia in order to start the global war. And actually, it's the place where the war started, and it's a place where the war should end with the Ukrainian victory and the Crimean Tatar victory. I saw that Ivan Hlibovitsky had a question. I saw he raised his hand.
You know, after the previous remarks, I just wanted to say that it's kind of difficult, because whenever we switch to Ukrainian, we don't switch the language, we switch the discourse. And it may be difficult to penetrate this difference between international discourse, talking about Ukrainian international discourse in English, and talking in local discourse in Ukrainian. But I think, with the amount of speeches, with the number of speeches that we've gone through already, it just makes sense to make a remark that eventually, as Ukraine has to learn to speak internationally, to speak English, I guess the world has to learn to speak Ukrainian, or at least to comprehend Ukrainian. Thank you.
As always, moving words from Yevhen. And yes, I see one raised hand. Yeah, just to the right of you. No, to the right of you. Yes.
Каріна Дорошенко, Український ветеранський фонд. Ми
I
на кожній панелі говоримо
represent
про
Ukrainian Veteran
майбутнє, яке десь колись настане при
Fund. We
відбудові
are talking about the future, about restoration and recovery of Ukraine, but we do not mention the current times. Now we have a very high level of trust in the Ukrainian armed forces, but unfortunately, the actions do not meet the words, and the veterans that come back to society from the front line face misunderstanding related to this trust and respect. So the question is how your institutions and organizations think about the social dialogue and how we should interact with those who come back from the war after our victory. And we have to understand the point that if now we have 1.5 million people in the armed forces, there will be a huge number of veterans who will come back to the communities, who will be rebuilding these communities. And definitely they will be involved in these participatory practices, they will be engaged into inclusive society, into institutions development. So my question is probably not a question but a comment. How your institutions are ready to engage the veterans into your activities. Thank you for the topic raised. This topic is really important for us because 800,000 people who come back to the employment market means huge economic effect. For example, on the 25th of August, there will be a special conference on the topic integration of veterans into business, into entrepreneurship. The name of the conference is Independent, and we'll be happy to see you at our event. Good news, Ukraine is not a newcomer here. For example, in America, the veterans companies produce GDP amounting to $1 trillion, and I know that now there are Ukrainian teams that study this experience, and there are a number of projects aimed at veterans. The idea is to convert the veterans' skills and experience into entrepreneurship activity.
I would like to briefly touch upon the issue of recovering and reconstructing institutions. Friends, if we want to build public and state institutions, we also need to build civic institutions. It just happens so that NGOs are not only a watchdog, but is also like a fighting dog. Reforms and transformations are carried out by robust NGOs. It just happens so. There's just one successful reform, if my memory serves me right, and this is the only reform that was designed, advocated for, monitored, and implemented by the government, which is digital transformation. As for all the other reforms, I believe that they were implemented with the direct participation or even upon the initiative of NGOs and CSOs. We're talking here about anti-corruption as a national idea. We're talking about the rule of law. Why? Because we have a great de jure team, and I'm really grateful to them. We have our partner organizations. We have powerful organizations that combat corruption. They move this agenda. That's why we're progressing in leaps and bounds, and we also have tangible and visceral outcomes. So we don't really have that many reform success in the prosecutor's office of police, and the Bar Association, Medvedchuk, was stripped of his lawyer's license just recently by dint of the efforts of several activists. We have 2 or 3 nationwide NGOs that are ready to move things in each and every area, and we have about 30, 40 different domains. So we will not be able to perform the task of our country's successful transformation. So the good news is that we have this increased ownership. We also have increased trust among citizens, so it's a fertile ground for further action, but we also need to help these institutions build so that they will help build state institutions. 2 last questions, you and then Natalia Prigornetska. Then we will call this panel discussion a day, but this discussion is to be continued.
Small remark, small reflection about Boris' words as a media-like institution, because my thought was that our media landscape is being decentralized. It's okay to have a dozen strong but not very big media organization, because people in Kopychynetska and in Kyiv and no institution or organization can't cover in proper way. But it's important, like I think, but Evgen Hlibovitsky said about discourse. So it's important to unite our efforts in such like recovery issues, inevitable topic. And and to discuss, to seek for such uniting, how to shape discourses.
Thank you for this remark. I ask if you want to answer, do it during the dinner, during the lunch, and Natalia Prigornetska, the final question.
Good
afternoon. My name is Natalia Prigornetska. I'm the co-founder of the Alliance of Ukrainian Organizations in Germany, and I'm also an active representative of the German civil society. We are talking about institutions as an opportunity to move the recovery and reconstruction process. We've been talking extensively about the internal dialogue, but institutions are also responsible for international dialogue. My question is as follows: what are the key messages that societies in other countries need to hear? In your opinion, what are these key messages, and what is important for Ukraine and our society as part of the recovery and reconstruction process? Thank you for the question. The first key message, I think, is that we need to understand that there's no third alternative for Ukraine. We're either here or there. We need to be fully ready for further development and integration. Integration cannot take place purely on our conditions, on our terms. It has to be a joint endeavor, providing that the will is really there. There's another challenge for our institutions, especially from the perspective of global reconstruction discussion. I don't really like the word reconstruction. I would call it modernization. I would not really like to see the reconstruction the way we had it in the past. In this context, it's important to have capable institutions so that we will be able to funnel all these funds in a high quality and rapid manner, because we will have quite a lot of money dumped on us, and that will be a huge problem indeed. I'm talking about state institutions, local authorities, civil society organizations. Since the beginning of 2022, we've had a lot of volunteers, foundations, but very often you have these mono jars in the monobank, but if you want to have the transparent disbursement of funds, if you want to implement high-quality projects, if you want to secure the integration of our country with high standards, I believe that we need to first and foremost focus on the building of all these institutions so that we will be able to implement as many projects as possible in a fast and high-quality manner. Natalia, I will be succinct. I'm not really sure which audiences you want to reach out to through these messages, because messages will be contingent on the audiences. But if we read the main news from our neighbors or even more remote countries, the news regarding weapons supplies, attitude towards Russia, the only thing I can say is be brave like a Ukrainian. I think that this is the best note to finish our discussion on. Be brave like a Ukrainian. Not only because these words are supportive and inspirational, but also because these words are truthful. I guess at this, we can wrap up this discussion. I would like to express my profuse gratitude to all the participants.